Let's start with a quick demonstration of what to avoid when painting an eye. Let's start with the don'ts. Number 1, the outline drawing is pretty inaccurate and cartoonish. Obviously, even though we're not necessarily going to cover this in this video here, drawing is obviously fundamental, especially proportions. In this video, we'll see how to paint eyes separately, but obviously even the most beautifully painted eye would look stupid if it's too close to the nose or a little bit too far apart from the other eye, or too low or too narrow, or whatever might happen. It doesn't take much, it's all in the proportions, and a few millimeters can be enough to throw away every attempt at achieving decent likeness. It takes practice, a lot of it, and if you think that you might need help with proportions, you can check out my Teach Yourself to Draw playlist and do the exercises in the resources for artists section on my website to go with it. Moving forward, I'll assume that you can draw a convincing eye with a pencil and mostly struggle to achieve the same results with a paintbrush. So we're mostly going to focus on how to do this with paint. Alright, so let's talk about things that don't work in this demonstration of what not to do. The eye in this one looks too uniform and flat. The entire white of the eye is a single color, which doesn't look natural. This is typical beginner mistake. The third problem is that the color of the iris is too strong. Even bright blue eyes don't need to be this blue, and a lot of subtlety is required here. Final thing, there are too many sharp lines to delineate and not enough midtones to create volume, which contributes to make this eye cartoonish and unrealistic. Alright, now that we've seen what we need to avoid, let's talk about a few key ideas to keep in mind to paint eyes. Outline versus mass. Might seem counterintuitive, but something that might throw you off is the outline of the eye. Indeed, a real eye doesn't have an outline. It can be done with makeup, obviously, with eyeliner, but in reality there is no visible sharp line around the eye. For that reason, when you draw your preparatory outline for the eye, you want to make sure that you won't bring in elements that might throw you off later. You see, we can recognize eyes without seeing any sharp details. We can even recognize the eyes of a person on a very blurry picture like this one. Eyes are mostly seen in terms of masses of values and not as an outline. Basically, the eye has a much better chance to reach a high degree of likeness if it is represented as a shadow shape, as a simple mass of value. So next time you get frustrated picking every little detail in the eye and end up with something awful, think about this. If you can recognize the eyes of a person on a blurry picture, it means that those sharp details are irrelevant. Actually, what matters most is the structure of the face that is visible through the eye, with the supraorbital margin, which is this part of the bone right here, the infraorbital margin, visible here. It's not just about the eye, it's the entire face, which include the eyes. It doesn't mean that you cannot put some lines and some sharp details, simply that they are fundamentally not necessary to get the structure of the eye right. The first lines shouldn't be about details, but about structure. During the blocking stage, you'll need to use structural line because this is indeed how you establish the proportions, but instead of drawing detail lines from inside, try only drawing the edges of the shadow shape surrounding the eye. It will make a huge difference because if the position is not right, you'll see it more clearly. If the proportions are not right, it will be easier to fix them before the details are painted. I recommend that you start establishing the overall proportions of the head, then only paint a very blocky shadow shape for the eye, including the entire eye socket and the surrounding elements like the eyebrow, but keep the inside blurry and vaporous. Keep this very basic envelope for as long as you can. And once the context of the entire face is in place, only in the end add the details that you judge necessary. As far as details go, I think that you can get away with not painting the eyelashes. You can try to simply suggest them with a vaporous brushstroke. Try to only feather a small stroke of color to suggest their presence, but please don't detail them individually. It looks really weird. Really quick, if you want to learn more about painting, you can check out my courses. My first course is focused on oil painting techniques from beginner to intermediate. My second course is more advanced and focuses on color theory and its application for painters. I have received great reviews. A lot of people told me that they really helped, so if you want to learn oil painting and color, I'm sure that they can help you as well. That's it, let's go back to the video now. Keep the iris for the end. Don't try to detail the iris too early. Like the cherry on top of the cake, it should only come in the end if possible. It's such a crucial element and it looks so awful if you misplace it that you want to preserve it for the end. You need to make sure that the entire structure of the eye socket is correct and that the entire structure of the face is in place before you can add those sharp details that make all the difference. It's counterintuitive really, because in our everyday life, we focus mainly on the iris of the people we see. We look at people in the eyes and it's easy to think that it should be the first thing that you do when you paint. Well, it's the opposite. It's actually such an important element that you want to keep it for the end. You don't want to mess it up in the early stages when the likeness is not well established. Of course, the position of the iris should be suggested somehow. You can't keep this part blank, but my recommendation is that you keep it as blurry and vague as possible for as long as you can. You don't want to go with sharp, detailed lines. What you can do is simply suggest the placement with a few simple strokes. Don't try to make something too round and perfect too early. Try to start with a very undescriptive blocking of the structure and the eyes, both of them, then move on to other features of the face and come back when everything else is in place. And finally, you can place those fine details that make all the difference. Sometimes the most important is what cannot be seen. When we think of the eye, we usually think of it as something round, like a white ball containing a smaller round shape, the iris. In reality, we only see a fraction of the actual eye, as most of it is hidden by the lids. It's pretty rare that we see the eye fully. Most of the time, with the angle of the head, the lid hides the eye almost completely. Yet the eyeball is still present, as we can still see its curvature and the volume that it creates underneath. This volume catches the light, just like you can guess the orientation of the light source by looking at the highlight on the surface of a sphere. You can see that the most light-facing part of the eyeball is lighter than the rest. If you don't paint this, the eye will look flat and it will make it look like it's stuck on the face. Everything facing the light source is supposed to be aligned in the direction of the light source. The highlight on the lid, the light area on top of the eyebrow, the reflection in the eyeball, they should all align because they all represent the same volume and they face the same light source. The eye casts shadows on itself. It's very important to paint them. The spherical volume needs to be reinforced with shadows and midtones on the eyeball itself. It's not just pure white. Make sure to suggest the fullness of the form and avoid painting the white of the eyeball with pure white. It needs to be a gradation. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily need to be gray, like just because the white of the eye is white. Actually, the shadow part, the white of the eye, is kind of skin tone like. It's more brown than gray. There also needs to be a thin stripe of shadow just below the lid. This is a very important element to suggest. About the color of the iris, no need to be too strong with the color of the iris, and here I'm simply using a touch of ultramarine blue and yellow ochre. That's going to be it for this video. If you liked it, remember to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to support the channel. Again, a huge thank you to my Patreon members. This video wouldn't be possible without your support. If you want to join the community, you'll find a link in the description below. You'll also find the links to both my courses, my oil painting course and my color course. Alright, that's it for today. As always, joy and inspiration to you, my friends.